When you open up Maya, close any pop-ups that appear and make sure the grid is turned on. Hold Alt on your keyboard and press and drag any of the mouse buttons to move the 3D camera. Left mouse button drag is rotation, middle mouse button drag is pan, and right mouse button drag is zoom. Now throw a cube into the scene by pressing the cube icon in the modeling tab. You'll notice there are lots of tabs and menus, but we only need a few to get started. With the cube in the scene, you can select it by clicking it or dragging over it, and deselect it by clicking off into empty space or pressing Alt plus D on your keyboard. Select the cube, put your mouse over it, and hold right click. Whilst you have right click held, you'll see a radio options menu. These are the selection modes. Currently we're in object mode and we can pick and click on any objects in the scene. The other selection modes we'll be using are Edge, Vertex, and Face. Select one of those three by mousing over it and letting go of right click. Now when you mouse over the cube, its edges, vertices, or faces will light up and you can select them. Now go back to the options mode and select the cube. Press W once on your keyboard. This will bring up manipulators which you can pull, which will move your model around. You can also press E for rotation and R for scale. Holding J whilst rotating will rotate it in increments rather than rotating it freely. Pressing Q on your keyboard will bring you back to selection mode. Ctrl Z will undo any changes you've made, and Ctrl Y will redo them. While moving the cube around, you can simultaneously hold X on your keyboard, and this will snap the cube to the grid. If you have multiple objects in the scene and you're moving one of them, you can hold V on your keyboard and this will snap it to any other vertices that are in the scene. With your cube selected and translation enabled, that means movement enabled, press the D key on your keyboard. This will change the manipulator's appearance, allowing it to also be rotated. But now any changes you make will affect only the manipulator. Wherever the manipulator is, that's where the pivot point of your model is. So any movements or rotations we make to it will be made by that point. You can move the pivot point anywhere after pressing D, but I'm going to hold V on my keyboard and snap it to the bottom level vertices of my cube. Then I'll press D again. All changes I make to the cube now will be made from that pivot point. You can return the pivot point back to the center of the model by going to the Modify drop-down and clicking Center Pivot. Select your cube and go to Vertex mode by holding right-click. You can do all the same movements, rotations, scalings, snappings, and pivot point changes to the individual vertices, edges, or faces as well. Let's look at the tabs to the left and right of the 3D view. To the left, we have our outliner, which is a list of all the objects in our scene. You can rename, reorganize, delete, and duplicate any of them. You delete by pressing the delete key on your keyboard, and you duplicate by pressing Ctrl plus D on your keyboard. You can delete and duplicate objects in the 3D view the exact same way. The outliner also allows you to create groups by selecting multiple objects and pressing Ctrl plus G on your keyboard. This makes a folder and places the objects inside. The folder itself can be manipulated as if it were an object, and it will take all the objects inside it along too. If you drag objects in the outliner with middle mouse button, you can drag them in and out of groups and rearrange them. Just be careful not to accidentally drag one object inside another object, as this will put it inside the other object as if it was a group. On the other side, to the right, we have our channel box, which, if it's closed, you can open with this button here. When you select an object, the channel box shows you all its coordinates for location, rotation, and size. We can type in values for these coordinates ourselves too. If we want to return an object to its original placement or size, we can reset the coordinates to 0 for translation and rotation, and 1 for scale. If we set scale to 0, the object will disappear. You can set a new default location for a model by going up to the Modify palette and clicking Freeze Transformations, turning all the channels to 0. You can also use the channels in combination with pivot points and groups to mirror objects. Here's an example. You can put a couple of cubes in a group, and you can set the group's pivot point to the center of the world. Then, with the group selected, you can go into its scale X value and type in -1. Then you can freeze the transformations to set the new default value. This is going to mirror an object to the other side. If I do this to a duplicate, I then have the same object on both sides, perfectly mirrored. If I want, I can also combine these objects by going to the Mesh drop-down and clicking Combine. Make sure to select the newly made object and go to Edit Mesh, Delete by Type, History after combining them. The combination isn't confirmed until you do this and can cause you errors or crashes down the line. Below the channel box, we have the Layers window. Here, we can make visibility groups. Click the New Layer button, and then select any objects or groups in either the 3D scene or the outliner which you want to add to the layer. Then right-click on the new layer you made and click Add Selected Objects. Now you can toggle visibility for all these objects simultaneously, as well as switch them to a locked template mode or reference mode. You can also change the color of the layer, which will be visible when you turn on the wireframe draw over. This leads us to the ways we can change the viewport. You can click these icons along the top of the viewport to change its mode and render settings. You can also click the panels drop-down and change your view to an orthographic one. Switch it back to Persp 1 when you want to switch back. With your mouse over the viewport, tapping space quickly will bring up 3 orthographic views alongside the perspective one. Mousing over any view and tapping space again will maximize it. You can manually enter this quad view from the far left panel, whilst also having access to dual view. You can change the perspective of any of these views. The other 3 panels on the right will be covered later. The timeline along the bottom is used for animation, so we can hide it for now. Just go to the Workspaces tab in the top right and change it to Standard. This about covers the general Maya workspace. We can now move on to the modeling tools. Let's look at the most common used tools for modeling in Maya. Make sure that you're on the Polymodeling panel and that the top left drop-down is set to modeling. Throw a cylinder in the scene and place it so it's standing tall in the center of the axis. Select all its middle edges and go to the Mesh Tools drop-down and select Connect. Press Enter and a new edge loop will be made in the center of the cylinder. Now in Mesh Tools again, select Insert Edge Loop and click in the middle area of the cylinder. These tools allow us to create new edges in between existing ones, which we can then manipulate to create details. In the Mesh Tools palette, we also have Offset Edge Loop, which creates 2 even loops from an existing one. We also have Multicut, which allows us to slice up a model, adding edges where we like. And Target Weld, which allows us to merge vertices or edges to each other. To delete edge loops, just select them by double-clicking and pressing Ctrl plus Delete on your keyboard. Make sure to be holding Ctrl, otherwise only the edges will be deleted, but not the vertices. This is important because stray vertices like these interfere with modeling processes. To see the live numbers of how many vertices and faces are in your scene, just go to Display, Heads Up Display, and then Polycount. In games, model resolution is measured by how many tries there are. Next, in the Edit Mesh tab, we have 4 more frequently used tools. Make a cube, select any edge, and click Bevel in the Edit Mesh dropdown. This will create a bevel and give you some more options to mess with. Use the multi-cut tool to make the many-sided faces on the sides of the beveled object into quads or tries. The reason for this will be explained later in the tutorial. Next in Edit Mesh, we have Collapse. Select a polyloop this time by clicking one edge and then double-clicking the one in front of it. This selects the loop going around the polygons. Now in Edit Mesh, click Collapse. The edges will be merged into one another, creating a single loop. Next we have Extrude. Select any face or multiple faces and click Extrude. This will extrude the selection and allow you to pull it out. This is useful for many situations, like increasing the size of an object while retaining its details, or adding more new details altogether. Next is Bridge. Select the face, delete it, select the hole's 2 opposite edges and click Bridge. This will literally bridge the two and can be done with multiple edges or even faces which are not connected. Next is Merge to Center, which merges selected vertices to the center. Now, even very experienced users forget which tools are in which dropdowns. Something you can do is open the dropdown with the tool you frequently use and click it whilst at the same time holding Ctrl and Shift. This will add it to whatever tab you have opened up. I do this for all my frequently used tools, although some of them are already in the Polymodeling tab. To get more options for any of the tools here, just select their option box in the dropdown. This opens a window with the tool-specific settings. If the tool is on a tab's palette, you can also double-click it and get the same option box pop up. The only other tools which I want to show you are Fill Hole in the Mesh menu, which fills area that Bridge does not handle. And the Soft and Harden Edge tools, which change how hard or soft the surface appears. Just select the edges you want to soften or harden and click one of the two tools. But remember, this just simulates the surface and does not add any actual resolution. Before moving on, let me just show you what the rest of the right-hand panels do. The Modeling Toolkit has some easy-to-access modeling tools and options. Some artists enjoy using it a lot, and others prefer to add tools to their hotbar. It's up to you. The next panel is Tool Settings. Depending on the tool you're using, you may see options appear here. Lastly, we have the Attributes panel, which is used in later stages when we add surface textures and for certain other functions which we don't need to cover yet. There are a few things we can do to make our job a little easier whilst we're modeling. This is a big program with a lot of functions, and there's a few things we need to do to make sure that we keep it running well and error-free. This is going to cover some of those issues and also cover how to make a project folder to make your life easier whilst organizing your work. All 3D programs work with only quads and tris. This means that any face on the model should have no more than 4 vertices and edges as part of it. Faces with more than 4 sides are called engons. You can have engons in your model whilst in Maya, and sometimes it's fine to do so if you're in the flow of modeling and they're not causing any issues. But for taking models beyond the modeling stage, and to avoid errors or issues, you'll need to clean up the model by turning engons into quads or tris. Do this with Connect or Multicut. Going up and looking for the 2 each time can get a little bit annoying. So something that you can do is after you've performed an action like a connect or a bridge or an extrude, you can just select the vertices or the edges that you want to do it to again and just press G on your keyboard. G in Maya means redo the last action. So if you just did a connect or if you just did a bridge, when you press G, it's going to do that again to whatever you have selected. There is an automatic option as well, but it's rather messy. If you select the object you're working on and look at its channels window, you'll see a list of text that gets bigger with every change you make. This is a record of every tool you use on the object. These are used if we want to go back and make further changes, like further adjusting a bevel. Unfortunately, this history, as it's called, clashes with itself when there are too many changes, and can cause errors or even crashes when it piles up too much. Select the object, go to Edit, Delete by Type, and then History. Or if you want to do this for all the objects in your scene, click All by Type, History. You'll notice that the object's history is now clear. This makes for fewer errors and crashes whilst working. I recommend clearing history before making any major modeling changes, like combining or separating. Your outliner actually also creates extra groups every time you make a big function like a combination. So deleting history also clears that out. And remember, save regularly and even increment your saves once in a while, so you know you have a working version somewhere. Interestingly, you can Ctrl Z and undo the deletion of an object's history. Something that's highly recommended to do when starting a new project is to create a project folder for Maya using its project folder creator. This will make work for you more organized and easier for us to mark. Go to File and click Project Window. Click New, type in the name of your project, for instance, Intro to Computer Games or Brief 1. Choose the directory where the project will be created and accept. This creates a predefined folder structure for you to use and allows Maya to link with the project so that it makes finding and opening your files much easier. Now go to File again, click Set Project, and select the folder that was just created. Test it out by going to File and click Save As. You should be automatically taken to your project folder and then to the Scenes folder to save your project. As we progress with the briefs, you'll use these subfolders a lot, so I strongly recommend working in a project. As a last tip regarding the file dropdown, you can click Recent Files or Recent Projects at the bottom of the list to quickly pick recent projects or open up recent files you've been working on. These are all the very basics you need to get started with Maya and model some cool assets. Use all these tools and techniques whilst you're working. This is a bonus. One last thing I wanted to show you is how to create an image plane to help you model certain things from an orthographic perspective. Go to Create and select Free Image Plane. This will create an empty square in your scene. Move the image plane down or backwards, click it, and go to the Attributes window. Click the little file icon and put an orthographic image or a picture that you're facing directly from the front or the side. You can now look through the orthographic perspective and use the image plane as a guide for your modeling. And put it into a locked layer.